Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Moms on a Mission podcast. I'm your host, Miriam Shaw. It's an honor to have you join me today. Today's guest really will probably leave you speechless. You've heard his name before. He's been in the national news, special agent with the FBI. Formerly, he was a special agent with the FBI, Steve Friend. If you recall, he was the first whistleblower as it relates to the January 6th subject investigations. And he has a book out called True Blue. And I highly recommend you purchase this. I just listened to it on Audible. It is so incredibly powerful. And I had him on today to talk about that. And if you think you know what happened with him, if you've just listened to mainstream media, I assure you, you don't know all the facts. And so you will be encouraged and motivated with his story. So don't go anywhere. Steve Friend, welcome to the Moms on a Mission podcast. It is such an honor to have you here today. Thanks for joining me.
No, I'm honored to be here. Thanks for the invitation.
So I was told that I needed to read your book, and to say that it was incredibly powerful is an understatement. When I had heard your story, of course, you were the first whistleblower exposing the FBI and the political lawfare and just the weaponization of our government against these J6ers. And it's not lost on me how your background kind of set you up and prepared you for such a time as this. And as I was reading your book, True Blue, it was just so impactful. And I do believe that your story is going to be used to really change not just the FBI, but our nation, encourage bravery. I'd love for you, though, I would like to first, before we get into the whistleblowing situation, the details surrounding that. What I loved about your book, True Blue, is you really set up your childhood experiences you had in your childhood, and then just going to Notre Dame as well, and your relationship with your grandfather. I mean, it was so fascinating how you set that up, and how just your experience with your family and in school, how that set you up to be prepared to stand firm in this situation. So I was going to see if you could just share with us a little bit about your childhood and some of the experiences that you felt prepared you to be a whistleblower.
Sure, and thanks for that opportunity. Look, I think the book itself was pretty providential, the way that my life kind of set itself out for this. I think it sort of set me up to be equipped to handle the stress as it's been now for 27 months. And even writing the book itself, I like to joke that I was researching the book for 37 years, so it should have come to me pretty quickly. I typed it out in 30 days. It was not me with the fingers on the keyboard. There's no question that was a higher power that was in control of that entire situation. But I grew up in mostly of my youth in Savannah, Georgia. My family moved there when I was in grammar school. Good kid, teacher's pet type, was a member of a family that is a white collar family. My dad's a CPA. I have an older sister who's an attorney, younger sister who's not a pharmacist, younger brother who's an engineer. And I was going to be in dad's business, was going to be an accountant. So set myself up for that academically, wanted to go to Notre Dame, again, really close with my father. That's his alma mater. And that was the dream. That was the road that I was going to follow in his footsteps. Pursued that. And after college, actually went and worked in accounting, both in Colorado for another small firm, and then with my dad. And after about a year or so of doing that, it was just really clear that that was not the path for me. I had an experience with the ROTC program at my high school, and always felt compelled that I wanted to do something in public service. Military was not in the cards. I'm asthmatic. I take medication every single day, so I couldn't actually be admitted to the armed services. So police work really looked like a natural fit for me. It was paramilitary in structure. I'm kind of a rules guy. And then looked into the opportunities that were available. And actually in my hometown in Savannah, there was a hiring surge. They were short-staffed, and I had the opportunity to go to an academy and then get on with the local police department. So did that, and it actually, again, things just kind of aligned, parenthetically set up when I graduated from the police academy. The graduation ceremony itself is when I was reintroduced to my wife. We'd gone to high school together and then gone our separate ways, but she is a Ukrainian immigrant, now an American citizen, and was looking into a career in the FBI at the time because of her language skills. And she got into my ear right away saying, hey, you have the accounting background, the law enforcement background, and I wound up applying and getting accepted to the FBI in 2014.
I love that. I thought that was a great story. How, just a full circle moment for you to meet again. I mean, again, I feel like that's pretty providential as well. I'd love for you to touch base though on your early childhood. You were bullied. You talked about that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm even now to this day, I think I probably are on the left side of the bell curve of height and stature as a person. I was just a small kid and was a rule follower, got good grades, made it pretty natural for me to be a victim of bullying. And when I was in middle school, really things kind of came to a head because I was at a private school. It was my parents saved and sacrificed to get me there. I took a admissions test, and we thought that that was going to be a great opportunity for me. But really, what it wound up being was just an opportunity for kids who were in that age demographic where that normally does happen to pick the kid that they were going to victimize, and I happened to be that guy. So was bullied for about a year and a half by several different people, and finally just had my fill of it one day, and wound up getting into a fist fight with a bully after school, and having that fight broken up. And we were 12 at the time, so it wasn't like there was going to be serious injuries. But my
I
parents
have to
saying
say, I loved how you set that up in the book when you were like, talking about, you're like, yeah, I'll meet you after school. And then you're like sitting there and you're saying like how long it took for the
it
date.
was
But it
the
was a real
the
thing, dude.
the only day that I didn't take notes or pay attention in class. The entire day was just my heart beating in my ears and felt like my uh, throat was all the way up into my mouth because I was just nervous about what was going to be there. But you see the after school specials, right? You're just supposed to stand up to the bully. And it was
Right.
very much like, I don't know what to do. I've not been in a physical confrontation where there's actually going to be blows thrown at that point. And to go through that and have it broken up relatively quickly. And then the actual moment where a teacher gives me I'm really disappointed in you. And I was always, again, a rule follower, but I just knew that I did the right thing and I was going to stick with that. And my parents went to war for me on that as well. I mean, my entire life, parents were very supportive. They said, just be honest with us, no matter what, we'll always have your back. And they totally did. And the school had a very strict rule about tuition. They said that it's non-refundable. And my parents went in and said, we're taking our kid out and you're going to refund our money. And the school said no. And my dad said, I will post up outside your school holding a sign every single day for the rest of my life if
Okay.
you do not
Now we
refund
know
our
where you
money.
got it from your dad, right? You're getting this from your dad.
Yes, yeah, it was my dad. And at first, my dad's probably the more animated of my parents. My mom, she's the field general. She's the sergeant, and my dad's maybe more of the four-star general. And she was in there, and she said she actually brought my grandfather to initially argue on my behalf because she figured he'd be more level-headed. And then she said, I need some more artillery fire. So my dad went in to have further meetings. And ultimately we got our money back. My sister and brother also as well. We all withdrew from the school, and it wound up being actually a really excellent move for us, no matter what, because we went to a public school, but they had a magnet program that was actually better academically than the private school we were at. So again, providentially worked out really
Yes.
well.
Well, kudos to your mom and dad because, I don't think most parents would have maybe responded that way. And then certainly not to that degree. They are, again, principle driven. And I heard you talk about that a lot in the book that you are a principled man of God. And I'm incredibly principle driven. It's not necessarily the issue, which that is usually important. And yours is very important, but it's the principle, the why, behind the whole thing. And I mean, kudos to your mom and dad for doing that. I think that is why you turned out so well and so highly principled because of them.
I think so. I think having them in my corner throughout my entire childhood growing up, we had a really stable home. There was no sort of tumult there. My story does not involve any sort of coming back from any adversity from a home life. It was later on, but that was also something that really equipped me with it. And even just having an outsized commitment to justice and to truth was always just a natural fit for me. I didn't include it in the book, but my siblings called me the golden child because it just was never in trouble. And I remember I had a good relationship with a teacher in high school, and she was an English teacher, and she actually organized a field trip for our whole class to go. And we were going to go do a series of events. It was a multiple overnight trip. And she was the only teacher who was going to go. And the kids were good, but it can be kind of daunting when you're taking 40, 17-year-olds anywhere. And
Yeah.
my teacher said, that all the kids came to her and said, "It'll be fine, Mrs. Scott, because Steve Friend's going to be there." So it's like you have another chaperone.
That's so great. I think there's one of you in every class. My son is 18, he's a senior, and there's somebody we say that about as well. And it's not my son, but it's somebody else. So that is such a compliment. One other thing I wanted you to touch base on regarding your childhood that it sounded like to me as I was listening to your amazing book, True Blue, was the influence of your grandfather on your life.
So my family is from New Jersey, and my grandparents were snowbirds, and they were spending half the year in Georgia, and ultimately they decided to retire in Georgia. So we would visit them a couple times a year because we were really close with them. And then ultimately, my family just packed up and moved to Georgia with my dad's job or anything like that. We just wanted to be there and live close to them. And I was really fortunate. I lived 4 miles away from my grandparents growing up. Could go see them anytime that I wanted, and we did. We always got breakfast together on the weekends, and would just go for visits. It wasn't just holidays or special occasions, and had a good relationship with both my grandmother and my grandfather. But my grandfather, he was the indispensable man to our family. Like everyone who had a relationship with him, be it kids in my household or my cousins or my aunts and uncles, my parents, everyone felt like they had a good relationship with my grandfather. And he had cultivated a unique interaction with every single person. It was highlighted by the fact that he had a unique nickname for every single person that only he would bequeath to them and only he would use, which I thought was really kind of a funny quirk that he had. But just a really smart guy, who had been in the armed services, was drafted for the Korean War, and he had stories to tell about that to me. And then he would just sit down, and he was just so well read that it was something that I really respected about him. And I to this day, I'm a big reader because I admired my grandfather's intellect and ability to carry out in conversation. And he would always be handing me the book that he was finishing up. And the last book that he gave to me before he passed, I still have to this day. And for a while, I didn't want to read it because I didn't want that to be the last time I had interaction with him. I finally got around to doing that, and it was a regular World War II Pacific history book. No sort of hidden messages in it, but I still have it, and I'll never leave me.
No, wow, that's so great. It's so interesting. The folks I interview, it's not lost on me that I believe God, makes us a certain way, but then he shapes our environment to prepare us. We see it in the Bible with Esther. We see it with David, before he killed Goliath, he killed a lion and a bear. And he had this sense of justice. Like, who are you to come, against the children of God like that? And I believe that the Lord, allows some things to happen and uses those for our good to prepare us for the big stage in that moment where you have to choose and make a choice of justice and truth, or you just go along, with everybody else. And so I noticed in your book, True Blue, it seemed like everything kind of picked up when you were reassigned to the Joint Terrorism Task Force, JTTF, which there were so many acronyms in the it was like I thought I'm going to try to memorize all these, and then by the 10th one I'm like, okay, I'm out, I can't memorize all of these. But the JTTF, and you had been really successful in connecting prior to that, researching and investigating child exploitation cases with some Native Americans, and that was incredibly fascinating. And did such a great job earning trust, and then you transferred to the JTTF, and in Florida. And I feel like that is where things, started to pick up for you. Could you talk about that?
So my first 7 years in the Bureau, I worked on Indian reservations in the Midwest. I was assigned to northeastern Nebraska, 3 Indian tribes that were there. My office was actually in Iowa. It was right on the border, Sioux City. And that was important to the later part of the story because you get a lot of exposure to a lot of cases when you work on Indian reservations. You're doing all violent crime. So I opened 200 cases and arrested 150 violent criminals. Many of them were exploiting children in about 7 years, which again, very unusual for the FBI. Only 150 agents at any given time are doing that sort of work. Opening that many cases, getting that many arrests is just a black sheep sort of experience. Transferred to Florida in 2021 to work on child exploitation, child pornography, human trafficking cases. Again, it's a niche arena within the FBI experience. Actually working on Indian reservations and working in child exploitation cases are the two violations that you can get out of if you're not equipped to do it. You can just say, oh, I can't handle it. But to me, it was where the most vulnerable people are. So I really liked doing it. Felt like I was almost in the flow, like I was meant to do that sort of work. High volume of cases. You also interact a lot with local law enforcement, and I'm prior cop, so I realized the value of local law enforcement and just do anything you can to get to yes for those guys because they're under-resourced, they're understaffed, and they just don't have the tools they need, but they're great cops. So ultimately, though, was reassigned at the end of the fiscal year in 2021 in October when they rejigger the manpower because the FBI has a quota system, and it part of that is where they're going to put the people, the resources. And again, there's a finite amount of resources and personnel, so I guess it does make sense to a certain extent. But being told that child pornography was to be ignored going forward, when I know it's such a rampant and terrible problem, didn't sit really well with me. But again, to ask me to jump and I say how high as long as it's within the confines of the law and my morality and my oath of office and did that and looked at what the FBI is doing on its terrorism cases and that did not sit well with me at all from a couple standpoints. One, I believe that if you're in law enforcement, you're a system idealist. You're not a system disruptor. The idealist is someone who believes in the Constitution and the rule of law and the policies and the procedures because you accept that victory in law enforcement is following due process itself. If I gather the facts and I present them at trial and the jury says not guilty, it's because the facts didn't support a conviction, not because I didn't do my job. As long as I do my job, it's fine by me and I can take that as a victory. But what the FBI does with its terrorism cases is the exact opposite. They are outcome driven. They want to get the person, so they will bend the rules, if not outright break the rules. And they were doing that with a lot of these cases. And I was very uncomfortable with that. And then secondly, they're also making the process the punishment for particular cases pertaining to January 6th. The FBI views that as its largest, most important investigation. They want to get as many people as possible and then make it as difficult as possible. And to me, being in the premier law enforcement agency for the country, that necessitates using the least amount of force necessary to bring someone peaceably into custody. You could just send them a summons, call them on the phone. You could send a local deputy over to their house, somebody who they're familiar with. You can meet them on their way to the mailbox, interdict them when they're walking with a cup of coffee in their hand and they don't have any ability to get weapons or anything that could be secreted in their waistband. But the FBI is sending SWAT teams to arrest people who said that they would cooperate. And to me, that's an unnecessary risk to that individual's safety and even to the FBI agents who are involved safety, because when you pick the way that you're going to bring someone into custody, you can a lot of times pick the outcome. And the most officer or agent involved shootings happen with SWAT.
Yeah, and we saw that with President Trump. I mean, with the documents, we just, it's a pattern that we're seeing across the nation, whether it's him, whether it's a J6 subject. It's you're right. The punishment is the process, and that's their MO. That's the way, they handle it. And in fact, in the book, you were talking about how you likened it to using, like basically you said elephant gun, to kill, I think you said a mouse, or sometimes I say like a hammer to kill a fly. Like you wouldn't even do that, in disciplining children. I mean, the least restrictive is what you want to do to get, the win, right? To get the safety you're looking for, the behavior change with children. I thought this was kind of funny, or not funny, I guess, but interesting because I mean, you were incredibly well read, and we didn't talk about this a lot, but your training as a police officer prior to getting into the FBI really, I believe, set you apart because you have had so much experience before you even got into the FBI. That really helped shape, and you're a nerd, let's be honest. So you've got the nerd factor going on, and then you've got the police work going on. And I think it uniquely set you up to view some of these atrocities differently. And you just have such factual knowledge, such a deep well of that to pull from when you're looking and you're sizing up like patterns and how they're regularly doing things. And you even, talked about the DIOG, the Domestic Investigations and Operations Guide. And you said it's the Bible for FBI casework, and it standardizes investigative measures to respect citizens' rights, their privacy, and so that it's all conducted within statutory and constitutional parameters. And that is your guide so that the FBI doesn't go rogue. So you clearly remembered what you read and are holding their feet to the fire. And I wonder, if that was a little surprising.
It was very disappointing and surprising, and kind of just soul crushing when you realize the people that you're sitting next to every single day, or even looking up to in a leadership capacity, they don't share those same sorts of beliefs. And you go through a very rigorous vetting process to get into the FBI. And some are longer than others. Mine was very long. It took
Yeah,
me
4 years.
4 years.
Yeah, that's
So,
crazy.
and I told my bosses at the time that I came forward and expressed my concerns. I said, look, I was vetted as a person of integrity. I thought that we were all on that. And they hammer you over the head that fidelity, bravery, integrity is the motto of the FBI, FBI. That's really what it stands for. And you know why the FBI badge is so small? It's so you can't hide behind it. I mean, all these sort of platitudes that they throw out there. And another element of it, beyond just having gone through a police academy and having an appreciation for American history, particularly, and why we are a unique experience in the human existence, and how we recognize that our rights come from God and not from government, and that the best thing that government can do is to protect the citizens' rights. That's why it exists. It shouldn't view the law as anything other than a mechanism to ensure we have a safe and secure society while respecting rights, to punish evil and to protect the innocent, rather than a tool or a weapon or an extra arrow in the quiver for the government to just go after who it wants. And there's an element of training in the FBI, particularly, that I took to heart, and that actually others independent of me, other whistleblowers, and we've become friends afterwards. We've all had this experience, the exact same training. And you go to the Holocaust Memorial, and you go to the MLK Memorial. It's 1 day field trip experience. And the Anti-Defamation League put this training on, so a left of center organization, where they gave you a behind the scenes law enforcement specific guide through the Holocaust Memorial. And you learn that if you believe the agency is off the rails, that you have to throw the flag, because it didn't start with Auschwitz. It started with the police force, the secret police force, doing these gradual infringements on people's rights until you othered them and you made them the Untermensch. And I cited that training, and I cited that oath of office specifically to my superiors. And the response that I got back to them was, yes, you have an oath of office. Yes, you have training. Yes, you have the ability to express your reasonable concerns via a whistleblower. But your real duty is to the FBI. And on top of that, you should set an example for your children and just follow orders. And that to me is the bizarro version. That's the photo negative version of why I swore the oath to be a special agent for the FBI.
Yeah, and to just follow orders. I mean, that's what happened in Nazi Germany. That's what happened in Mao's China. I mean, we know where that ends. It's not pretty. And I mean, really, as I was reading your book, True Blue, or listening to it, the things that you are calling out are the things that we were escaping when we, formed the United States of America. I mean, tyranny and draconian rule and, religious freedom. I know you had an interesting situation happen prior to this, with COVID and taking a stand there for your religious freedom and experience some pushback there as well. And so I just wanted to make this point clear, and that is, this is not completely surprising and new to you, because you had some struggles, and at another point in your life, prior to this, with the government, and just I feel like, maybe just a little foreshadowing, of things to come that was, given to you. But I'd love for you to share, if you would, Steve, about how so tell our audience exactly what you finally had to they really pushed you into a corner and backed you into a corner, and you're going to have to start. I think you were doing transportation as they were investigating a particular J6 subject, and so you came down. Explain to our listeners what your problem was that you're going to have to go and just ride. But tell our listeners what your problem was exactly with continuing to work for the FBI in investigating these J6ers.
This is one of the big problems. It's one of the vulnerabilities that people have when they work for a large organization like the FBI, because they can compartmentalize your responsibility to such a granular level that you can delude yourself into believing that, well, I'm not doing anything wrong, so I don't need to throw the flag here. So for the first opportunity that we had in my office to go and execute an arrest for a January 6th, where I had concerns about, we're sending SWAT, which is very dangerous. And on top of that, the way that we're carrying forward these investigations is out of step with our rules that are laid out for us. In essence, we're violating their rights because we are out of step, we're departing from our rules, and we're not telling them we're doing that. And you have to be very specific in law enforcement. If you depart from the rules, even if there's a good reason for it, you have to justify it. You have to account for that, and you have to let them know that you did that. That's part of the way that the government operates. It's an open book. That defendant gets to find out that, hey, Steve, you used the wrong color evidence tape. Why was that? Oh, well, I was out of red, so I had to use yellow. Oh, okay. Well, then my defense attorney gets to ask you, agent friend on the stand, did you do anything else wrong with this case? And that creates reasonable doubt. So I want to be really buttoned up with my cases. So I had these concerns, and then also the political concerns where the FBI, instead of opening up one case in Washington, D.C. for January 6th, like it should have done, they opened a separate case for every single person and then spread them around the country so that in my office in Daytona, it looked like we had terrorists in Daytona, but they were people who trespassed at the Capitol. So we could create the false illusion, the false political narrative that domestic terrorism was on the rise around the entire country by the thousands. So I had these concerns and I expressed them. And they said, Steve, we understand what you're saying, but your only job is once he's under arrest, you just drive him. You're just Uber. You're not doing anything wrong. And I said, look, I have a responsibility to take a step back, look at the full mosaic and say, I'm one cog in an entire thing that's out of line. So again, it is my responsibility, it is my job to say what we're doing is wrong and say, I have a conflict of interest. Until you're able to resolve that, I can't participate in it because it's a violation of my oath. We're violating the person's due process rights and their cruel and unusual punishment rights by sending SWAT to his house when he has no expectation that we're going to be there because we haven't talked to him for 18 months. And 18 months ago, when you talked to him, he said he would cooperate with you. That's a very risky and dangerous situation. Everybody Monday morning quarterbacks like a Ruby Ridge or a Waco. I'm here on Saturday. I'm telling you what's going to happen. Maybe not this time, but somewhere along the line it's going to happen. And we're going to look back in history and say, why didn't anyone say anything? That's me. I don't want to be here. Like I've got two verses that are really important to me. It's been important in my version. You alluded to one, Esther 4:14, born for such a time as this. The other one is Isaiah 6:8. And whom shall I send? Send me. Here I am, send me. But people don't understand, overlooking that is when Isaiah says, here I am. He's not jumping out of his chair because he wants the responsibility. He's saying, here I am. I'm available for tasking if you need me to be here to do it, which is sort of where I felt like I had a really great career. I was on a trajectory. I knew my exact day I was going to retire, and I had doing work that I love to do. It's the best ego feeling stroke in the world to come home and have two little boys run to the door and ask you how many people you took to jail that day because they think you're like a total stud.
Superhero.
And but I never really viewed my FBI experience as something I was entitled to. I had to do the job, and the job at that moment, in that exact moment, was throw the flag. And if it means you can't have a future with the FBI, then that's the consequences. You know, we mentioned bullying. I believe the FBI is now the bully. So if my job is to stand up to bullies, then I have to stand up to the FBI, and that's where I drew the line on that.
And I think there's no better way to teach your boys, how to be God-fearing men and great American patriots is to stand up to a bully, no matter who it is. And especially, I mean, our government was set up to protect ourselves because every government unchecked becomes tyrannical. I mean, that is just a fact. And so, I mean, what better way to teach your boys how to be men is to bravely, and maybe with knees wobbling at some point, bravely stand up and do the right thing and put your flag in the ground and say, no, I'm not doing that. I mean, I think that is the best way that you teach your kids is not necessarily say, hey, go with the flow. I tell my son, hey, you're salmon. We don't just go with the culture. We don't just swim. We swim upstream. Our standard is the word of God and the Constitution. That's how we live our life. If 99 people are ignoring the word of God and the Constitution, then we swim upstream. We're salmon. And I keep telling that over and over. We are salmon. we swim upstream. And it's almost like it has to just, you have to be comfortable, become comfortable with being uncomfortable. And sadly, our society is driven by comfort today.
I agree, and you nailed it with that last part. Being American is not a leisure pursuit. You hear that America is not a country, that we're an idea. I take it a step further. We're not an idea, we're an action verb. And
Mhm.
that necessitates you being uncomfortable and inconvenienced at times. The only reason we have the trappings that we do in this country, where it's the greatest country in the world, is because our forefathers were willing to be uncomfortable and inconvenienced, not to a level that we're going to have to nowadays. I mean, we're not going to have to get on covered wagons and traverse the entire continent, knowing full well that several of our children are likely not going to survive that voyage. So I think we can all sort of like temper where our expectations are for, but we can't just sit back and have men playing fantasy football as opposed to going to a school board meeting where their children are being indoctrinated into CRT or radical sexual ideology. I mean, how hard is it to give up a couple hours on a Tuesday night? And unfortunately, we just are in a position right now where people are addicted to being comfortable. And the communists who have seized hold of power, even though they are in a minority, they realized a long time ago that you don't have to be in a majority. You just have to control the choke points. If there's 50 people in a room who you disagree with, you just have to be the gatekeeper at the door to control them, because people will just willingly go along because they just don't want conflict. And people are loath to embrace the situation we're in, which is really scary. And the scary situation, the reality is that our country right now is in a cold civil war. There's no question in my mind about that. And unfortunately, it's an asymmetrical fight because one side is conservative, libertarian, and is under the delusion that we can all just get along. We can have unity. We all really want the same thing. You might have a yard sign for a different candidate than me, but just mow your grass and it'll be just fine. And the other side is the Borg from Star Trek and says that which not is banned is required. You will be assimilated. Resistance is futile. And it's an asymmetrical battle, and we are unable to come to some sort of reconciliation. My greatest fear is that we're going to have our children in a kinetic engagement at the next antietam. So if the FBI is contributing to that, it's my duty to, as uncomfortable and inconvenient as it is to step up and say, what you're doing is raising the temperature on the boiling pot to when it boils over, because now half the country believes that the other half that voted differently than them are terrorists, and they're unwilling to engage in a polite civil conversation and settle our differences like we have always done in this country, with the exception of 1860s, and that's peacefully.
Yeah, I mean that's how our country was founded, right? I mean they locked themselves into a room and they're like, "We are not leaving." I mean, I think they said it was like, I don't know, it was in the dead heat of summer, and they're like, "We are not leaving until we get this figured out." And there was a commitment to finish it up. There was a commitment for conflict and for, I mean, how our country was founded was they didn't all agree, and they still didn't agree even, when our constitution was written, but they settled on that. And so brilliantly so far back, they knew that a government unchecked can become tyrannical. And so one thing you mentioned in the book, you talked about the Sixth Amendment and the Eighth Amendment. And the Sixth says, in all criminal prosecutions the accused shall enjoy the right to a speedy and public trial by an impartial jury. And I heard you reference that quite a bit with these J6 subjects, that that this is not happening here at all.
It's not. And look, I recently had a conversation with an attorney who's done quite a bit of defense work for January 6 cases. His name is Jonathan Gross. He has described to me what has gone on there. I haven't been sitting in the trials, but we're talking about things like people who have been on multiple juries for multiple trials, who have their ergo, they have convicted one person and then were allowed on another jury. We have situations where they're during voir dire, they're asking the jurors, what would you be your feelings of interacting with someone who's wearing a Make America Great Again hat? And they would basically say, like, I would not have anything to do with them. Well, in essence, you're now admitting that you are not a fair, impartial, and balanced juror, and you shouldn't be allowed on that. But instead, they're being allowed on there. In fact, people are doing anything they can to get on the jury because they feel like this is their opportunity for retribution. And that extends beyond just the jury. I mean, that's the general public. You have judges that are allowing evidence admitted into the trials that has nothing to do with the case. We're talking about things like, oh, this person on their Facebook account liked a photograph of a pickup truck with a Donald Trump bumper sticker, and that's admissible in court. Just,
Wow.
we're going to inflame the jury, and the judge says that's just fine with me. Or the judge mets out punishment by saying that I'm going to maximize the punishment. And the Supreme Court fortunately overturned it, but the obstruction of an official proceeding, the 18 United States Code 1512 C2 charge, that was used as a felony to get people for otherwise misdemeanor at most trespassing, which again, I would quibble with whether or not it's trespassing if a Capitol Police officer says, yes, you can come on
Yeah,
in.
come
I
on
think you
in.
take that in good faith. But the obstruction of official proceeding charge is a tax law. It stems from the Enron scandal, where you had Arthur Anderson, who was shredding documents, a side note, in accordance with their own policies. And then they were vindicated when they went to the Supreme Court and they won on appeal. But at that point, Arthur Anderson was no longer a going concern, and the DOJ only targeted them so that they could go after Enron, which I'm not defending Enron, but that was, again, a weaponized government. But it's a tax law that says you can't shred documents. That's basically what it says. But it was reinterpreted by the Department of Justice and the FBI to jam up people with a felony charge so that they would just plead guilty. And again, that's back to weaponizing the system and looking at laws as an opportunity to go after people rather than the mechanism that you're supposed to have to instill that we're a safe society.
Yeah, and you also mentioned the Eighth Amendment, where it says excessive bail shall not be required, nor excessive fines imposed, nor cruel and unusual punishment inflicted. And it's kind of like using a hammer to kill a fly. I mean, this is to protect the rights of even people who really do bad things. I mean, they are still protected by our Constitution and these amendments, but yet it's like you said, the duty was to the FBI over these amendments and over our Constitution. And it's just, I mean, you know that it's gone too far, and the weaponization of our government has gone unchecked for so long that they could say something like that to you in that meeting. I want to finish with that and talk about that meeting. So first of all, what we were talking before the show, that was probably my favorite chapter of the whole book, because it was like mental gymnastics were going on, and I could not believe, I didn't tell you this before the show, but Steve, you sounded like an attorney, so maybe your sister's skills are rubbing off on you. But I was like, how did he know to, like, I mean, obviously you're brilliant, but the way you articulated yourself, and it was like they were trying to trap you by just saying, Steve, just do your job. Like, and trying to get you to define, like, when is it okay to obey? When is it not okay to obey? And then trying to trap you and saying, well, you didn't really get in on any of these cases. So you're saying you're referencing fact, but you haven't even really joined any of these cases yet. So how are you absolutely speaking? Like, it was unbelievable to me.
Beating your head up against a wall. But what you have to understand with that conversation that I had with Sean Ryan and Colt Markowski, assistant special agents in charge of the Jacksonville field office at the time, they're in management of the FBI. And unfortunately, what happens in the FBI to promote, if you want to get to the top of that pyramid, you have to start it really early in your career. So you're talking about 5 or 6 years at most before the people start to promote. And they really aren't subject matter experts on what they're talking about. I had more investigative experience than both of those guys combined, likely at that point. And I'm also a person that prided himself on being a professional. Look, I would interview someone and I would record it. I would go and listen to my audio recordings of the interviews when it had nothing to do with the case, just to make myself a better interviewer. I took my job very seriously because I wanted to do it the best that I possibly could. I paid attention to the January 6 cases because they were in the news, but because I also have an interest in them. I was involved with the Gretchen Whitmer case at the same time. I paid attention to that because of my experience there. Those guys who I had the conversation with, they were institution over constitution. I mean,
Mm.
Sean, who wasn't really the antagonist so much, but it was very clear to me that, Sean just wanted to resolve the situation and not have to deal with it anymore. I was just kind of like a bother to him. But he never for a moment had considered due process in anything. He just presumed that that was fine, and we're winning at trial, so we know everything's fine. And Colt was definitely way more antagonistic. He had his eyes on further promotion. And side note, I just learned that he's been promoted yet again by the FBI, which is why we definitely need to have Kash Patel take over.
He
Uh,
has, so twice since your interaction with him?
Yes, he has, which
Oh
is
my.
which is actually checks because the promotion calendar is about 18 to 24 months that most people are looking to be up and at the next level. And he presented things to me that were just false information. I mean, you're talking about a guy who said that the January 6th defendants killed police officers, and that's just
Yeah,
factually inaccurate. And it to me
unbelievable.
indicates someone who just didn't know the details of the cases that he was supposed to be overseeing, because before he was in that position, he was overseeing the Joint Terrorism Task Force, which had responsibility for all those cases. So he either didn't know the details of the cases, or he was just imbibing whatever the party line was of a very politicized agency at this point.
Yeah, that when I didn't when I was listening to the questioning, I didn't have your take on it until the next chapter. But while I'm listening to that, I'm thinking, is this guy really that stupid, or is he just flat out lying? Either one is nefarious, I believe, but and not okay. But I just couldn't believe, and you kept respectfully responding, say, actually, that's not true. Actually, that's not true, sir. And I was like, oh my gosh, this guy. That's so disturbing to know that he's been promoted twice. Well, which leads me to my second last question. I wanted to ask you about your thoughts with Cash and this nomination, Cash Patel. And I've had the honor to meet him and interview him, and also read his book, Government Gangsters. And he laid out an excellent plan in that book to clean up the FBI. But when I was curious, and I was so glad you addressed this in your book. Do you think that the FBI is salvageable even with Cash Patel at the helm?
I think if you installed me as a dictator for the day, the FBI would be shattered to 1,000 pieces and scattered to the wind. I believe that it's become such a secret police force that it has to be reconstituted to such a degree that it's six of one, half dozen the other, restarting or reforming. But I will say this about Kash Patel. If I will give the old college try to one person to turn the demo into a Reno, it's that man right there. He's eminently qualified for the position. He brings a unique background to it. He was not just a prosecutor, but he was also a defense attorney, which I think is very important because it gives you a unique perspective, unlike the career prosecutors that are typically nominated to take that post. He has a healthy respect for the amount of power that the FBI brings in, and federal government at large can bring in and can make a process the punishment, and it can skirt the rules. And that's very important. He has prosecuted terrorism. He has been involved in the intelligence space. He also rooted out corruption with the Russia Gate. I mean, he was one of the lead guys on that. And for all the talk about him being a political partisan, all he did was expose FBI corruption. It just happened to be inconvenient for one side of the political aisle. And he's made no secret about his preference for Donald Trump. And to me, I think that's honestly refreshing when you compare it to James Comey, who said that he was straight and narrow, but then was
Yeah.
subsequently wearing a Biden-Harris t-shirt, and Christopher Wray, who oversaw the censorship of the Hunter Biden laptop story during the 2020 presidential election, and thinks that that's just fine. I mean, those guys are just cloaked in what their political ideologies are. And the last thing about Cash that I'll say, and nobody knows this, is that 2 years ago when I was at a very low point, out of work, wife out of work at the same time, Cash Patel found a way to contact me on Thanksgiving. And he said that he ran a foundation that existed to support veterans and whistleblowers who did the right thing, and that his foundation wanted to give my family enough money to get us through the holidays to pay our health insurance and pay our general bills. And he made that happen. And he said, I don't want you to make this publicly known. This is just a project that's really important to me. I don't do this for any sort of public accolade or anything like that. That's the measure of the man who's going to become the next FBI director. And that's why it gives me hope that he'll take that helm. And that's why I'm willing to give it the old college try.
Yeah, he's such a humble man, not just brilliant and hardworking, but so humble and kind. And just personally, I think that's so great to have somebody who's like that, and has this intrinsic sense about them to help others who've lost it all doing the right thing. And that's so incredible. My last question for you, Steve, is this. When you put your flag in the ground and you decided to become a whistleblower and expose, what you found out and to speak the truth, what went through your mind? What motivated you to do that? And then what can our listeners garner from that? And how can they use that, in their own daily life to stand for truth bravely and to not be afraid?
Well, to me, I like to live my life on my deathbed. I don't want to ever look back and realize that, I punked out when I knew the right thing to do. It's one thing if I make a mistake, an error, or a judgment. If, as long as I'm trying to do the right thing at the right time, in the right way, for the right reasons, I can live with that. But when there's something that is that crystal clear, then there's no question about what you have to take. And that might necessitate that you do something that is not easy. But the truth is always simple. It just might not necessarily be easy. So that to me was really a driving factor. I mean, I wanted to set an example for my children. I wanted to actually uphold the oath that I took really seriously, and people should go into any sort of position of public trust with their eyes wide open and what that might require of them to do. So to me, it was never really a dispute of whether or not I was going to do it. And the last thing is, and this isn't really uh, a personal down deep thing. You have to just be prepared in your lifestyle. One of the sad realities, it's a national security risk to us, is that most people who work for the FBI are financially beholden to the FBI. They're compromised. They're waiting for the Golden Eagle to dump their paycheck every 2 weeks. And they live paycheck to paycheck. And my wife and I don't do that. We never wanted to be beholden to anyone, the borrower, slave to the lender. We were devotees to Dave Ramsey, and we were
Love it.
debt free. And to me, it was recreational law enforcement. But I was there because I believed in the mission, not because I needed the paycheck. So that certainly was one of the reasons that made the decision a little bit easier, more palatable. But at the same time, it was always really simple for me.
Wow. Well, I just want to say thank you. How can folks connect with you? Where can they get your book, True Blue? And then how can they connect with you maybe on social media or things like that?
Yes, you can check out my Twitter profile or my X profile. It's at Real Steve Friend is where you find me there. I have a podcast called the American Radicals Podcast, which is on Rumble. Also have a TV show on Patriot TV, which is called True Blue. Airs weekdays, 2 o'clock, and mirrors the same title as the book, which is True Blue, My Journey from Beat Cop to Suspended FBI Whistleblower. And that's available on Amazon and Barnes & Noble, and people can pick up a copy there. They get the audio version as well. And then I just always say to people, if they want to pick up an extra copy and send it to 935 Pennsylvania Avenue, Northwest Washington, D.C., addressed to Christopher Wray as a parting gift for him this Christmas so he can find out what's really going on in his FBI, I think that he would probably appreciate it.
That's so great. I love it. I absolutely love it. Well, what a great Christmas we could give Christopher Wray with, thousands and thousands of copies of. Can you imagine? That would be so great. Well, thank you so much, Steve. Thank you. I know you say you do this for your kids and for the country, but you talked about at the end of the book that you're fighting, that you're always fighting for us, for fellow Americans, and that you'll always have our back. And I just want to say thank you, and I hope that we can buy your book and support you in whatever way and have your back as well. Thank you, sir. Appreciate you.
No, thank you very much for having me.
And one way we can protect our family, he talked about becoming a whistleblower because he wanted to stand up for his boys, his kids, this next generation. Another way we can take a stand for this next generation in our own home and create a legacy is to purchase some gold and silver. You don't hear about this on the mainstream media. If you watch Fox, you might see some gold companies, advertise, but it's so expensive because they're paying for marketing. They're they have all these fees and things, and so. But I joined Miles Franklin Precious Metals. I became an outside broker for them, but not initially. I rolled over my IRA. I did that first. I started ordering silver every 2 weeks. And once I started researching this, I realized, we should do what we can do and allow God to do what we can. Initially when I thought about, okay, buying a few ounces of silver every 2 weeks, what is that going to do? Well, first of all, it creates good habits, good discipline, having some hard assets. And then secondly, it gives something to God to multiply. If you go to Miles Franklin Precious Metals, you can go to the website, but the pricing there is not the best pricing. If you email me or call me and let me help you. We can just start by just having a quick education about gold and silver, why it's important. And then secondly, I can give you better pricing. So email me, call me. The number and the information is on the screen below my face there. And just shoot me a message and let me just talk to you and see what we can do. You can roll over an IRA tax free. And you can actually have gold and silver sitting in a vault, and you can have these hard assets. My question I want to leave with you is, if you don't trust the government, if they showed their true colors during COVID, if you don't trust them as it relates to injections, things of that nature, if you don't trust them, like we just saw with the FBI and the allegiance to that, they're encouraging Steve to be more indebted to the FBI and their practices than the Constitution. I mean, if you see these discrepancies with our government, why do we believe them when we say this green paper that we call, money? Why do we believe them when they say it has value? I mean, it's a piece of paper. Gold and silver has lasted for thousands and thousands of years. So call me, email me. Let's just get you going, even if it's just a few ounces of silver every few weeks. And join me as you're protecting your family and creating a legacy with some hard assets like gold and silver. I hope you all have a great Christmas and you're a blessing. Thank you so much for your support. And I hope you have a great day.